Hey everyone, welcome to Dave's Bonsai. On today's episode, a package came to me in the mail today.
Welcome to Bonsai Acres.
Welcome everyone into my kitchen where I'm doing a little bit of editing on the laptop today, putting some more episodes together where we revisit the Expo. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about that, an Expo review in a moment. But first of all, I thought I'd open up this box. So I've been going to the post office the last week, and I've been sending things in the mail, some places in the United States of America and our country, my country here. And then I've also been sending a few things overseas from the Expo packages. Now I know a few of you have already received them, and I've got some pictures from those folks, and we're going to be sharing those on future episodes. But lo and behold, before I got everything shipped out, I got something in the mail. I love getting mail. And look at that, a good old-fashioned handwritten letter. Here we go. Dear David, I hope this finds you well and in one piece. When we first discussed my offering some Tom Butterworth bonsai pots for the Expo, I said I would send one for yourself too. As you know, it's been a roller coaster few months, but here is your very own TB bonsai pot as promised. I hope you like it. I would love to see what you choose to plant in it. It's a pot. All right, I got myself a pot from Mr. Tom Butterworth. That's awesome. There is still a chance to win one of the 3 pots in the giveaway. Deadline is the end of the 31st of August. I better publish this pretty quick here. Be sure you and your viewers enter to draw. All the best. Now, I haven't entered to draw yet, but because he sent me this, I'm not going to enter. I'm going to let someone else win. Thank you, Jason, from the Bonsai Garden. He's the one who orchestrated some pots from Tom Butterworth, and this is apparently my pot from Tom Butterworth. So here we go. And if you are still waiting for your shipment in the mail, be patient. It's coming. They told me 6 to 10 days for most shipments. So by September 1st, I would imagine everybody should be taken care of. All right, here we go. It seems to be in one piece, which is good. Now, if you go back and watch the video of Jason, when he talks about the pots from Mr. Butterworth, the feet of his pots are absolutely stunning. Oh my gosh, look at this. Oh my word, Jason. And look at the bottom of these feet. Some lattice textured work on the bottom of this feet, kind of like that crisscross lattice pattern. He's got his little stamp there of a bonsai tree. This Japanese symbol here. What, I have no idea what. Oh my gosh, these are stunning. When I talk to Angelica Ramirez, it's kind of like she collects pots. She's got over 200 pots and she has some trees in there, but they're just beautiful amongst themselves. You don't even need a tree in here. Oh my, what will I put into this beast? Thank you so much, Jason. This means the world to me. It was so great to bring the community together in the Bonsai Expo, and just the kindness and generosity keeps flowing through the YouTube community. Congratulations on your recent 19,000 subscribers. I can only wish one day to be that big. Very, very cool numbers for you. You're pushing 20,000. That's fantastic. And it's going to keep growing. So for my viewers, anybody else who's viewing, new to the channel, old to the channel, there's still a pot to be given away as of the receiving of this package in the mail. So you've got till the 31st to enter. So go watch Jason Hanrahan, the Bonsai Garden. Go check out his channel. I'll try to find that link and put it into this video, and you can go ahead and you can win a pot. And as a matter of fact, if I have the teas that he sent me, I'll put that in the description as well. Or if I have a copy of it, I'll add it to this.
Hi, I'm Jason from the Bonsai Garden. Now, we all have our favourite bonsai potters and ceramicists, and I'm no different. One of my favourites is a British potter, Tom Butterworth, and a number of my trees are in Tom Butterworth pots. Tom's pots all have a beautiful wabi-sabi aesthetic. Wabi-sabi is a Japanese aesthetic centred on the beauty of imperfection, impermanence and simplicity. It values natural materials, asymmetry, roughness, and the quiet elegance of age and weathering. The pot should reflect nature's quiet humility and support the tree's story, rather than compete with it. Now, I've teamed up with Dave to offer you a chance to win one of 3 beautiful Tom Butterworth pots. Pot 1 is this medium to large drum style pot constructed from standard stoneware with decorated feet and foot ring and glazed in a bright reactive blue glaze. One of the things I always love about Tom's pots is the effort and detail he puts into the feet. Pot 2 is this taller cascade pot in a turquoise colour, in an unusual engraved or decayed look. Pot 3 is this medium flared round pot in a drum style with decorated feet, and it has studs placed around the top of the pot and has had the upper section glazed in a speckled granite green glaze and a dark oxide wash on the lower section for effect. Like many of Tom's pots, it's got beautiful detailing on the feet, in this case ginkgo leaves. The draw is open to anyone wherever you are in the world. So for your chance to win one of these 3 fantastic bonsai pots, scoot along to my channel, the Bonsai Garden, and check out my latest video on bonsai pots for your chance to win. And good luck.
But go check out the Bonsai Garden for the free pot giveaway. It was all in conjunction with the expo from a couple weeks back, the 26th of July of 2025. And speaking of that, we still have more stuff to review. So we've got a lot of video out there yet that I'm going to be releasing from the expo. But right now, we are going to go and we're going to show you an interview that really meant the world to me. A man that I met a few years ago through the Minnesota Bonsai Society, and he's just become a bonsai friend that I can't wait to see at the Nationals, and that's Mr. Jonas Dupuich. So he took a half an hour or hour of his time back earlier this summer of 2025 and talked to me about how we can up our game in bonsai. So let's revisit the interview from the one and only, the amazing human and bonsai practitioner. Here's Jonas Dupuich, everybody. Welcoming everybody back here at the Expo 2025, this crazy online live stream. I have the one and only Jonas Dupuich, everyone. Jonas, again, thank you for being here first.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Tell me where it started for you. Let's go back to the very beginning. I know your family, I think, owned a nursery, but how did bonsai start, and when did it start for you, Jonas?
Well, I always knew what bonsai was growing up because my father had given my mother a tree when they were in junior high. And so there was always one bonsai in the backyard, but it never really meant much to me. We saw it there. Bonsai was definitely not a hobby of anyone in the house. It was just a plant that lived there. But the family business was a retail nursery. And after college, I was working for my dad And I was actually hiding from customers in the back, pruning a Japanese maple. And a stranger walked up to me, introduced himself, and just started pointing at the tree I was working on and said, "Cut it here, cut it there." And I thought, who is this guy? And I did what he said, and it looked really good. And it turns out his name was Boone. And so that's how I met my teacher, and that's where everything began.
And how long ago was that? How long have you known Boone?
That was in 1993, so that was 32 years ago.
You wrote about bonsai first, is that correct? I mean, you've got books now, of course. We'll talk about those in a little bit. You do have a YouTube channel. You go around the country, but was most of it blogging for you and kind of writing about bonsai? Is that really how you got started with your
Well, I've
teaching of
been
bonsai?
I grew bonsai for a lot of years before I started the blog. I had actually started a blog at work, and it made my boss uncomfortable. So they made me take down that. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just spend my free time writing about trees instead of trying to help my boss. So I switched over to bonsai and kind of never looked back. But I've been doing the blog about, yeah, 15 years, I think, something like that.
Well, you do have a new book out, so let's talk about that real quick. I have given out many of your books, the previous book, The Little Book of Bonsai, to a lot of workshop attendees. I'm going to be looking to place another order for workshops coming up because I love your book, your first one. Now, I've not seen other than pictures and advertisement for it. Tell us a little bit about this new book that just hit, I think, in April. So it's a little over a month, almost 2 months old. Tell us about this new venture that you just finished.
So the new book, the Essential Bonsai book, is really aimed at anyone who's trying to up their game. The kind of target audience is anyone who wants to get more satisfaction out of their collection. The first book was really intended as an introduction. It answers the questions, what is bonsai and how do I make this thing not die? The next book kind of runs you through the entire process of what material you might want to buy or collect to help you achieve your goals for your collection. That it goes from there into how do you make the trees look the way you want them to look. From there, we go through a lot of the basic techniques and then provide a couple chapters of case studies to help people learn how to apply the techniques that we covered earlier on.
That's so perfect because I mean, this whole expo, there's a lot of YouTubers out there, and some people will call, a dime a dozen. And there's good ones, there's not so good ones. And I have one, and people think what they will of it. But the one thing that we have is an incredible passion for this hobby. And we're all hobbyists, and we kind of all aspire to do what you just said. What can we do to up our game a little bit? So I'm going to jump right into just kind of those questions with you now before we talk about other things. Give me a couple of, just off the cuff here, your first couple things you would share with Minnesota Bonsai Society, the Expo viewers today. What are a couple of things you really think people right now where bonsai is at and what you're seeing out there? How do we up our game, Jonas?
I think one of the first things is just kind of deciding what that means for people. Um, Are people satisfied with the level of work they're doing on the trees? Are they satisfied with the quality of their trees? And is there anything more? A lot of people, because it is a hobby, have very different goals or aims for their free time away from whatever else that takes them away from their trees. I'm not sure what that could possibly be. Bonsai is about as important as it gets, of course. But starting by figuring out, what is kind of the gap between where people are and where they want to be, and that could lead in different directions.
Sure.
One of the main ones is, as I'd say, a little more idea about long-term thinking, in that ideally our trees are getting better every single time we're working on them. And if we're not seeing that, then likely we're either working with the wrong material or our techniques could improve a little bit to where we're starting to see that improvement a lot faster.
So the one thing you said that stuck out to me, and I kind of knew this in the back of my mind, you said it to me either driving to our workshop that we attended or to the group a couple days later. What a lot of us probably have to do is kind of step back a little bit and focus on, like, what are we, the material, what are we bringing in our yard, and what are we bringing into our collection? Do we have 100 trees that are do we have 15 that were? Tell me more about that philosophy, because that really hit a chord with me, and I want to have you share that with everybody again.
I remember exactly what we were talking about. And what came up was the idea that of all the decisions we make in bonsai, by far, if your goal is to have more higher quality trees, one type of decision matters more than all of the others combined. And that decision is very simply, what material do we bring onto the property?
Yeah.
In other words, when we bring a tree home, whether it's a, old tree, young tree, good tree, bad tree, we know we can make it better. We're smart. We have these techniques. We can nurse it back to health. We can make improvements. But if our starting points aren't aligned with what we enjoy doing, whether that's the type of work we're doing or the type of tree we most like, let alone a type of tree that grows well where we live, then
Right.
all of that energy is not going to really help us achieve those goals. Whereas if we get a starting point that's going to facilitate the kind of learning we want to do and reward us with the kind of beauty that we want to see in our trees, then that can make things accelerate like crazy. You also mentioned numbers of trees, and that's true. For people who grow really high quality bonsai as a hobbyist, if you've got any other non-bonsai obligations, 12, 15 trees is a very reasonable number of trees. When you have something this dense, this full, it is not a gimme to be able to, work on every single branch of this, wire every bit of this. That can take a whole lot of time.
Yeah.
And so, if you want higher quality, that often begins with reducing the collection so you have a smaller number of trees.
One of the things that I've talked about with people over the years, um, you line up 10 professionals and look at a tree, you're going to get possibly 8 to 10 different thoughts. So, how do
Mhm.
you factor that into what you're talking about too and up in your game? And of course, all the variables you mentioned play into that. Well, what kind of tree? What's your microclimate? What's your region of the country? But yeah, if I'm going to work with you and then go work with Tyler, if I'm going to bring Bjorn over or see him somewhere overseas, how do we balance all that, Jonas?
Well, the easy way to balance it is just to move within a 5-minute drive of your favorite professional, and that takes care of it, right?
I'll be there next week, Jonas.
Excellent. So that's a really tough one because not everybody has access to the resources that they want to interact with on a regular basis to practice their craft and hone their techniques. And so I believe fairly strongly that if you can get a foundation with one core teacher, ideally the best teacher possible, after you have kind of the basics under your belt, you can make trees look the way you want and you feel good about your technique, then I highly recommend stealing from everybody. But you just mentioned a lot of really fantastic teachers. Learning a little bit here and there and here and there at the beginning can be really tough because we're all doing more or less the same kind of thing, but we might have slightly different artistic goals, or we
Yeah.
might have the same goals, but we approach them differently because we have different techniques based on who we all studied with.
Yeah.
And so I'd say it's a challenging one to navigate, but the starting point is always take a look at the kind of work people do that you are working with. And if you see the kind of beauty or interest in the trees that they're working with, then they could be a really good candidate for someone who might be able to help you on your way.
But talk about clubs a little bit and the importance of getting, the support you need to get that upper echelon of trees.
Well, I think that last phrase is really the crux of it. One of the best things a club can do for its membership is to connect them with whatever it is they're looking for. It can provide at a very basic level, if you're new, how do I keep these trees alive and what trees grow well where I live? In Minnesota, basic tree health is not to be taken for granted because winter care is not always going to be the most straightforward thing, depending on the species that you're growing.
Right.
Beyond that, clubs can bring in speakers and introduce you to a whole lot of different professionals. So again, another nice thing about the Minnesota Club is that they regularly work with professionals from outside the area.
Mhm.
Different people I find really light up with or connect with different professionals, different approaches, different aesthetics or techniques. And so by having a kind of revolving crew come in and out, that can expose people to something that might really light them up. And if it does, then they might want to, pursue, oh, what has that person produced? Can I watch their videos? Can I read what they've written? Can I interact with them personally or maybe work with them in person? A lot of these guys and women have intensives where you can go work in person with them. And all of those are really fantastic ways to take that next step.
I can really pat, well, not my back personally, but the Minnesota Bonsai Society has done a pretty exceptional job. We've got our fundamentals group with Peter T, who's been through town. We have you that have been through town recently, which is fantastic. And Andrew's been here a couple times in the last couple years. So to have the different perspectives and the styles, and someone who likes the deciduous and someone who likes the pines, and really, like you said in the beginning, like when I stepped into this hobby almost 10 years ago, whoo, overwhelming and like scary as all get out. But really, the more you go to these events and hear these different perspectives, I can't preach that enough. Eventually, it's going to start going like, ah, that makes more sense, and that makes more sense. And I love how Jonas just said that. So if clubs can get experience like that, I also think that that's crucial for success.
Yeah, and you are spoiled in Minnesota in that you bring in some really top talent from all over, and I think that's a great service to the members.
Yeah.
Now, what's the flip side of that? One of the
Yeah.
challenges is if you're only bumping into these people once or twice a year, it can be really hard to get the help you need since our trees need what they need at different times of year. And so
Right.
that's a pretty genuine challenge. And depending on, again, the species you grow, there's different ways of handling that. I have found, for example, that I lead pine study groups in a number of cities, and that works because you can work on those trees 2 to 3 times a year,
Mhm.
and that's about the attention those trees need. Whereas deciduous trees um, are, it can be a lot more productive if you can work on them 3, 4 times a year. And
Yeah.
so, depending on what you're doing and how good you are at your techniques, that's going to have a big effect on how quickly you see the improvement in your trees.
Are you a traditional kind of guy with your bonsai, or more natural? Where do you lean?
So I'd say it's funny. I'll give you an answer that sounds wonderful, but then it'll result in the same kind of place. I actually really appreciate seeing trees done in lots of different directions, and that's one of the main ideas behind our Pacific Bonsai Expo,
Yeah.
which is a large juried exhibit we host on the West Coast every other year.
Uh-huh.
And one of my personal goals for the event is I love it when we can see work that goes in very different directions.
Mm.
We have all these different spectra on which to evaluate our trees, whether they can be more naturalistic or more abstract, whether a reflection of the environment in which the trees grew in, or a much more exaggerated version of that. And so it may not be as realistic a tree. And so
Mhm.
when it comes to exhibits, I actually like seeing work from many different professionals and hobbyists in many different directions. In terms of how I navigate that in my garden, I like to say that I often start with the trunk and then try to kind of adorn or decorate the trunk with whatever branches feel appropriate based on the size, shape, and style,
Uh-huh.
whatever the characteristics are in that trunk. Now, that said, the bigger variable is what trunks am I choosing in the first place to bring onto the property again? And
Yeah.
so if I find a good informal upright trunk, this is a tree I actually dug from a grower. I dug this out of the ground in 2001 actually, and have worked on all the branches ever since then.
Wow.
Um, the whole top of the tree was one bud when I started, and I grafted, I think, all but one of the branches on at one point. And
Oh,
so that trunk made a good starting point for an informal upright. That's going to
yeah.
yield a very traditional kind of bonsai.
Yeah.
But if I find some really compelling material that does something fun, more and more I'm trying to be a little more playful with these mature trees and find more non-conventional designs
Sure.
that kind of pique my curiosity.
I was blessed to be in Bill Valvanis's place last year on my road trip. And, he just walks you around his garden and it's fantastic. And all of a sudden he showed me this barberry. And I have well, this little guy right behind me is a barberry. It's from my dad's backyard, free of charge, dug it up. And the other one's big and 30 years old. And his barberry he found in somebody's property. Where he says, "Can I have that?" And he shows me this bark. He's air layered it twice, and it's got this really craggly bark. And it's like I never in a million years expected Bill Valvanis to show off a barberry to me. So I think that open-mindedness in bonsai, which I think is maybe perhaps more in the last 50 years or in the West, I think that's fantastic that he showed me that.
Yeah, it's really fun to see all the different stuff. And I think right now we actually have so many professionals working in so many directions that we can have all kinds of great models for what we might do with a given piece of material. And I think that's really fun compared to, say, 25 years ago, when it was more either we had to try to do as close as we could get to what we'd see in a Japanese event, or
Yeah,
just make something up on our own. Now we have a lot of really high technique approaches and some really
sure.
fun new directions.
How will going to that expo support the upping of our game for people who are thinking about going but on the fence? Tell people to come out and why. Why should they come out to the expo?
I could play to your enlightened self-interest and say it's going to be a fantastic shopping opportunity. And so if there's any containers or tools or supplies, let alone trees, we have one of the largest and most robust vendor areas from across the country. We had actually three vendors fly in from Japan for our last event to sell at the show.
Wow.
So we have a pretty awesome mix of stuff that's available.
Yeah.
But my chief interest in bonsai is I love really beautiful trees, old trees with fantastic character that really do show the relationship between a person and that material over time. I think it just creates a kind of character that you don't get with freshly collected material or really young trees that have yet to develop that character.
Yeah.
And so when Eric and I first started the event, the goal really was to assemble. We just selfishly wanted to walk into the room with the best trees possible. And we've tried to create really a mechanism or a system to kind of produce that. And if you want to learn from beautiful trees, they're right there to study. Always get close up to them, look and see where the branches come from, try to figure out what you do or don't like about them. You can learn maybe who worked on the trees and talk to those people in person because many of the creators are there. So it's just one of the single best learning opportunities for really serious bonsai enthusiasts to engage in their trees, just as this fall will be at the U.S. National Collection, which is the awesome East Coast event that provides just as great an opportunity to look at beautiful bonsai.
And I shied away from them in the beginning, feeling like, yeah, I just didn't know. And now that I've been across the country a little bit on a road trip last year, I really appreciate seeing trees. I don't have a tree that's even close to any of these trees. Don't know if I ever will per se. Maybe it's not my journey, but it is something special to walk amongst these trees. So I would recommend it for everybody.
Well, and you really touched on something there, mentioning your road trip and seeing trees around the country. If you came to my garden today, you would see a lot of things at a lot of different stages of development. But at any given time, the odds are that no more than one or two trees would be anywhere near show ready.
Mm,
And even those trees would just blend in with all the other trees on the bench. The pots wouldn't be clean, there wouldn't be a nice top dressing. When you
yeah,
go to an exhibit, you're not only seeing the trees that you would have to visit 50 different gardens to see all of those trees,
yeah.
but by seeing them beautifully lit on a clean backdrop with the perfect containers with an accent plant on a nice stand, these are all details you wouldn't be able to get just by visiting these people's gardens. And so I really do think it's a special thing when you get to see these trees in person. I just love going to great shows wherever they happen to be.
Early in your bonsai career, you and your trees, maybe not the books, maybe not the teaching, unless that is your biggest challenge. What was kind of your biggest challenge with the bonsai learning curve and kind of figuring things out? Was there just a couple of just big challenges in your bonsai life?
There were a couple big learning opportunities. By far, the biggest challenge for the first 10, 15 years was just finding time to work on the trees. I loved it from right away, really. And having a full-time job, and I didn't have the facilities set up at home so that I could necessarily work on my trees after dark, unless I brought them indoors into my kitchen or something. And so it was really hard to get what I wanted out of it, just working with limited hours. And so I took as many workshops as I could, and I was really lucky that I had a fantastic teacher and great friend, Boone Monikativi part. And that is what really made everything possible. But I will tell you, the year I learned the most, after studying with Boone for about 10 years, a lot of stuff was going on in life. And so I actually took a break from all formal bonsai events. And that left me alone in my garden with my trees, just kind of one-on-one while I worked on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it was one of the first times I ever sat down in front of a really good tree with zero feedback or checking from my teacher. And I
Yeah.
remember looking at a tree, not unlike this one, and thinking to myself, well, I think I know what to do. I'd been doing the work myself in workshops, but someone was always checking, or I could always talk about it.
Yeah.
So I remember I did a lot of things to that tree, and some of them I made up on the spot, some of them I were very well practiced on. 12 months later, I came back and looked at the tree, and some of the things I had done came out really well. but some of the other things I had done to the tree are among the stupidest things I'd ever done to a bonsai, period. I still am kind of embarrassed about it. That said, because I took ultimate responsibility for my collection for the first time in that year, my learning progressed faster than at any other point. Now, I did have a fantastic base of 10 years of great teaching,
Yeah.
but I think even when you have a teacher, feeling like the teacher's making all the decisions versus you feeling like you're making the decisions or at least understanding them, that was kind of the crux of where I was able to really accelerate my learning kind of from there going forward.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love that. It's almost like kind of almost breaking that little, maybe not codependence, but your dependence
Yeah.
on that guy on your shoulder, that trainer, that teacher, that sensei, whatever people want to call them. It's like, no, they're gone. And what have you learned? And just, get in
The
there and
lifeline.
try it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and been having a full year separation. I don't necessarily recommend this, but it's funny. I never would have had that perspective had I not gone through that process.
Sure.
Whereas afterwards, I would go to a teacher and I felt like we were more partners in deciding. Obviously, much less experienced than my teacher, but I felt a different level of engagement, which actually helped me pay attention to the results of what I did
Nice.
because ultimately we all have to teach ourselves bonsai. And you don't know it, but that was actually the working title of my book while I was writing it, this last one,
Okay.
because the idea is you know more about your trees, your weather, and your garden and your goals than I do. And so at some level, I'm just arming you with the tools so that you can make the trees that you want to make. And it's a different way of thinking about it. And so I really just want to give people what they need so that they can be in charge of that process with their own collections.
But it brings up an interesting point. You've mentioned a couple times now in our short time together here about what you want and your tree and your style and your yard and you. But then then people put their tree in a show. And I know there's probably all kinds of, dare I say, politics in judging of anything in this world. But I heard a podcast with, I think, Ryan and Andrew, and they were talking about, I don't know if it was the Pacific Expo or just a tree that perhaps, I'm paraphrasing, perhaps could have, should have, would have won best of show in maybe a different circumstance. And are we able to appreciate a tree for, like, wow, what that person did to that tree, knowing how hard that is to create that? I mean, yeah, we have our Japanese black pines that are very specific care and to get this end result. But I don't know if this is ringing a bell for you or not. But
Yes, it
yeah, there's
is.
some trees out there that are fantastic, but they're never going to win best in show, or are they, or should they?
Yeah, two quick things come to mind. The one is not everyone feels comfortable putting trees in shows, and I totally get that.
Yeah,
But I would, if we can let go of the judgment aspect of the shows, I think putting a tree in an exhibit is one of the absolute best things we can do to accelerate our learning. And here's why. When you put a tree in a show, you start asking a different set of questions that wouldn't occur to you otherwise. You're going to say, oh, what would be the best foliar preparation for this show? Like, how do I get the needles dense, equally dense on this pine from top to bottom? What time of year do I have to work on the tree to make it look its best at a certain time of year? What techniques do I need to learn to do as little wire or maybe no wire as possible? How do I dial in a perfect silhouette that conveys the flow, whether from left to right or right to left that I want to get? What's the perfect pot? You kind of get the idea. And so
yeah,
until you run through an exhibit as an exhibitor, you're just leaving a lot of learning on the table that's actually going to inform the work you do throughout the year. So for that alone, I think it's a fantastic opportunity that we all have to learn and by just sharing our work with others and knowing that we take inspiration from seeing beautiful trees, we can help others do that with our trees. That's
yeah.
the one half. The judging bit, I can give you a little story. So yeah, Ryan and Andrew had a great discussion about what trees did or didn't get the kind of attention they thought made sense for a given tree. And I'll say, in so many cases, the right tree doesn't win based on any one given person's perspective, but maybe based on someone else's perspective, the right tree won in that case. The
Sure.
way we do it for the expo is that we are really big fans of having the exhibitors evaluate the trees because it's such a good learning experience to force people to look closely at the trees and learn how do we start thinking about, what characteristics we want to see in different bonsai. Now, how absolute or non-subjective can judging be? We had 5 jury members for the expo this last year, and we had 3 for the first one.
Okay.
When we got the results back from our first jury member, and these are all, we'll just say at the time it was 3 of the tip-top professionals in North America were our jury members.
Yeah.
And they juried the show completely anonymously. When we got back the first scores, Eric and I looked at each other and just thought, huh. When the second person gave their scores, we looked at each other and I said, do we need to worry about this? Because we didn't want to let trees that we didn't understand in the show. When the third person gave their scores, we're like, okay, none of this makes any sense at all. We need to run the numbers.
Yeah.
What we found is that the 3 professionals agreed on the best trees, but it was a very long tail of radical differences. And so I'd say in general, every single individual has such strong biases. Some I think they're aware of, some they're not aware of.
Yeah.
And until you get a good number of really highly educated people, you're not going to get the as good a reflection of what one aspect of the community thinks. Now,
Okay.
knowing how subjective that is makes us feel really good about our subjective measure, and we actually have compared our results. Um, our exhibitor pool as a whole of 50 people actually picked 4 of the same 5 trees as the 8 professionals in the room. And so there's
Right.
actually a lot more overlap than people give it credit. But did the prizes go to the ones I picked? Not all of them, but
Yeah.
most of them did.
Yeah. Oh.
So I don't know if that helps or hurts
No.
it, but it really is a subjective thing. And so
Yeah.
I just say consider the source whenever you're hearing feedback on that. They likely have some really great points and try to hold on to those points as you're learning so that you can figure out what it is that they value so highly in a good tree.
And I love that. That's where I think critiques are awesome. And I think we in life, as in bonsai, well, we all have to be understanding that our perspective is not the perspective, it's a perspective. And so it's good to hear those. And I think that'll, like you said earlier, that can only up your game. It can only give you a different way to look at your tree, this kind of tree, and give you ideas and hopefully flourish. I would imagine.
That's the goal.
That is the goal. I asked you about a challenge before. You shared a couple. So tell me a couple of your successes in this bonsai journey.
Well, I guess one of the successes would be the flip side of a challenge, and that is I remember I liked pines growing up as a kid. I always loved Japanese gardens. And so even though bonsai wasn't on my radar, I really loved Japanese gardens. And when I first started, I remember asking Boone, hey, why aren't there more black pine bonsai around? And he mentioned that they're challenging to import. And I thought to myself, well, if we don't start growing them now, we'll never have them. And so I started growing a lot of bonsai from seed.
Mm,
And so I've been growing bonsai from seed, gosh, for 31 years now. And
wow.
I've learned a lot about every single stage of development from those early propagation stages up through prepping really beautiful trees for exhibits. I
Yeah.
did a tiny bit of that in Japan even. And so it's a whole range of different ways to interact with these trees. One of the challenges is there are some teenage years that are really, really awkward and the trees look awful. But what I've learned is that over time, if you kind of push through that, a lot of these trees will end up looking good. And so one of the big lessons I've come away with is how to not give up when things look awful. I remember years ago when I still had full-time non-bonsai work, I would give away or sell pennies on the dollar trees whenever I felt stressed, like I couldn't get to everything. I'd bring a bunch of these 5, 10-year-old seedlings to a club meeting and here, you guys take them. You can do
Yeah.
something with it. Boy, I wish I could go back and grab almost every one of those trees because they looked really funny at the time. But if you give it a little bit more energy, a lot of them can get a lot better. And so I've kind of let go of feeling like I know the absolute truth about where a tree is going to go when you're doing that long-term development.
Yeah.
Doing long-term development, it's a different kind of equation, but I'd say one of my successes has been learning about how to kind of get through those really awkward areas and produce something that's fun to look at.
One of the things I wanted to share a quick story in my appreciation for you being here today, with the Expo folks. Um, one of the reasons why I wanted you on the show is just because this bonsai community that I've met online, YouTube, and my travels, and you and the club, and bonsai people are pretty cool people. It's a fantastic community, and I'll never forget my time with Jonas Dupuich when I was the driver from the Minnesota Bonsai Society Club, bringing to the expo. And Jonas, you remembered that you and I were going to maybe chat, and you said, "Yeah, I have my recording equipment, Dave." And it's like, of all the things going on in your world, in your hemisphere, that you thought about me enough to, we didn't get the interview then, but it was still in your brain. And so I applaud you as a human. I applaud you for your incredible bonsai and the joy that you bring to every place you go. I mean, your passion and enthusiasm and joyous nature for bonsai is second to none. And so I just wanted to publicly thank you for just who you are in bonsai.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Bonsai is super fun, and it's hard not to share that fun. And knowing that my work is getting to share that fun with people, it really doesn't get a whole lot better than that. I feel lucky at least a few minutes every day of the year.
I talked with Chris Baker out at Chicago Botanical a couple times in the last year, and my favorite thing of his, when we talked about when people ask the silly question, "What's your favorite tree?" and he, in one of his interns, affectionately told me with a little chuckle, it said, "What, Dave? It's the tree you're working on right now." So we don't have favorite trees, and I think you mentioned this later. To up our game, we have to sit with that tree, and that tree has to be our favorite on the planet right then. And we really have to think and focus and plan, and we really do have to work on a tree like it's the only one we've got, don't we? Does that make sense to you? Do you appreciate that line of thinking?
I think there's a reason that we keep hearing versions of that story from so many different teachers.
Yeah.
I'd say one refinement I can add to that is one of the biggest lessons that I learned in Japan. It was the best non-lesson lesson I ever got. I was preparing a tree for an exhibit in Japan, and I wrapped up my work, I wired it, I plucked it, I had it all cherried out, mossed up, and I asked the teacher to take a look at it, and he said, "Are you sure you're ready?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I did all the work, and take a look. What do you think it needs?" And he said, "Are you sure?" He asked me again. And I thought, I'll just work on it a little bit more. He wasn't suggesting whether or not I had or hadn't done a great job. He wasn't suggesting there were any big problems. What he was suggesting by asking me more than once was, "You're going to feel really stupid if I walk over there and make two quick changes that you could have made and the tree looks a lot better. I'm giving you the opportunity to focus as hard as you can on that tree and see what you can get out of it." And in terms of doing show prep, and in that case, it was a black pine, I found that after I thought I was done, I spent 2 or 3 hours stepping back from the tree, looking at it. You know what? That branch is a little more dense than that one. Let me pull some needles out of there. You
Yeah.
know what? Those needles are a little out of alignment. I'm going to use a guy wire and pull those into place. Little teeny tiny refinements, I think, really honed my vision, focused me on what it was to look for, and just let me know that there are layers of things that require nothing more than trying to avoid being embarrassed by a guy who's there genuinely just trying to help me. So he didn't tell me a single tip on the tree, but he gave me the opportunity to realize how much more I could learn by focusing, or as you put it, by loving that tree in front of you while you're working on it.
So as people wrap up whatever they're watching on this expo, and they're going to go jump into their gardens and their trees, some parting, summarizing thoughts. How can they up their game, Jonas? What are we doing to up our game in general? Some final
I'd
parting
say
thoughts.
the foundation for upping anything, whether it's ourselves, I'll say two things actually. The number one is focus on the health of the trees. If your trees are healthy and producing the kind of growth that will allow them to develop quickly, that's going to give you the opportunity to do more work and get more payback from it. The
Mm.
other is, I'd say, invest in yourself. A lot of people buy many, 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 whatever it happens to be, whether it's tools, trees, pots, whatever habit happens to be. But if you invest in yourself, in studying, in learning, in classes, in reading, in watching videos, participating in events like this, investing in yourself is going to be, over time, by far the most effective way to kind of get where you're going. And if all the money just is going out and none of it's really making you the bonsai practitioner you want to be, think of what things you can do, throughout the year that might start tipping the balance a little bit, so that you're arming yourself with the knowledge you need when you're alone with your trees to get the absolute most out of it that you can.
Well, that's fantastic. We can have the tools, we can have the trees, we can have the perfect microclimate.
Beautiful workshop, a greenhouse, yeah.
But if we haven't taught ourselves and grown ourselves and learned, all that stuff's going to sit there and not get better. I like that very, very much. Well, thank you so much for being here. I do appreciate it, Jonas.
Thank you. This was an absolutely fantastic chat. Glad we got to catch up.
Welcome to Bonsai Acres.